Hi, I'm Avery Sinclair. And the first time I realized my family had stolen my future was the day I stood outside a bank clutching a mortgage denial letter with my name at the top and someone else's debt all over it. It was supposed to be the beginning of something new. I'd spent years doing everything right, saving, living below my means, building good credit, or so I thought. I wanted a place that was mine. Not too big. A two-bedroom condo with enough sunlight to feel like a fresh start. But when the loan officer cleared his throat and offered that practiced, sympathetic smile, I knew before he spoke. "I'm sorry, Miss Sinclair, but the underwriters flagged several outstanding accounts." I remember blinking at him, the words not quite landing. Outstanding accounts? My student loans were paid off. My credit card sat at zero. I'd never missed a payment in my life. "I don't understand," I said. He tapped his screen gently, as if softening the blow. "There are multiple delinquent accounts tied to your name. Credit cards, an auto loan, a consolidated student loan. Some of these are years past due." I felt the room tilt slightly. This wasn't just a small mistake. "How much?" I asked. He hesitated. "Altogether? Roughly 150,000. I couldn't even breathe enough to respond. Standing outside the bank, I stared at the letter in my hand like it might rewrite itself if I held it long enough. My stomach felt hollow, like something had been scooped out and I hadn't noticed until now. I called the credit bureau that afternoon. I needed to hear it from someone else. Maybe this was a clerical error. Maybe another Avery Sinclair had trashed her credit, and I was caught in the crossfire. But when the agent read the details, my hope evaporated. "The credit cards were opened when you were 17, she said. "An auto loan at 20, and there's a student loan originating 4 years ago, all under your social security number." That couldn't be right. I'd never taken out those loans. I didn't even own a car. I rented, I budgeted, I planned. I did everything the way I was supposed to. "Who opened them?" I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted. The agent sighed. "I can't legally say who filled out the applications, but they're under your name, your signature." Except it wasn't my signature. That night, I drove to my parents' house, the letter folded neatly in my purse like a quiet grenade. The living room smelled like lemon polish and false comfort. My mother sat on the couch, flipping through a magazine. My father watched a game show, beer sweating in his hand. It was all too normal. I stood there, heartbeat loud in my ears. "I need to talk to you," I said. My mother didn't look up right away. "Can it wait, honey? They're about to announce the winner." "No," I said. "It can't." That got their attention. I pulled the letter out, unfolded it with hands I forced to stay steady. "What's this?" my father asked. "It's a mortgage denial. I was denied because of delinquent accounts I never opened." My mother frowned. "There must be a mistake." I held her gaze. "No, there's no mistake. These accounts were opened under my name, my social security number." They exchanged a glance. The silence between us thickened. Finally, my father leaned back, arms crossed. "Avery, that was years ago. You were too young to understand money. We handled things." I blinked. "You handled things?" My voice cracked despite me. "You mean you opened credit cards and loans in my name?" "It was for the family," my mother said softly. "We needed help. Ethan's tuition, the car after Dad lost his job." I felt the ground tilt again. "You stole my name," I whispered. "You ruined my credit." My father scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. You're acting like we robbed you." "You did," I said louder than I meant. "We're family," my mother said quickly, her voice sugary, like that could smooth it over. "Families help each other. You'll bounce back. You've always been the strong one." I shook my head, fighting the heat rising behind my eyes. "I didn't agree to this. I didn't sign anything." "You were 17, my father snapped. "You didn't know what you were signing half the time." The words hit harder than I expected. I looked at them, their faces blank with justification, no trace of guilt. They didn't think they'd done anything wrong. In their minds, this was family business. But in mine, it was the first crack in the foundation I'd spent my whole life standing on. I left their house that night with the letter burning a hole in my purse and something colder settling into my bones. Not anger, not yet. but the beginnings of something stronger. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to learn. And then I was going to make sure they never held that kind of power over me again. Have you ever been punished for trying to stand on your own? The next morning, I stared at the ceiling for hours before I got out of bed. I don't know what I was waiting for. Maybe the weight in my chest to lift, or for someone to call and tell me this was all a mistake. That the credit bureau had the wrong person, the wrong social security number. But the phone never rang. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at the glowing screen, my heart racing with every click as I logged into the online credit portal. I had never really looked at my credit report before. I didn't have to. I lived simply. I paid my bills. I thought that was enough. It wasn't. Page after page, account after account, I watched the story of my financial life unfold, not as I'd lived it, but as someone else had written it. There were 4 credit cards, each maxed out, each opened within months of my 17th birthday. A student loan I never applied for. An auto loan for a car I'd never driven. And the worst part? Late payments, defaults, interest piling on top of interest. This wasn't just debt. It was theft. It felt like looking at a crime scene where I was both the victim and the suspect. My hands trembled as I clicked through the details. I could almost hear my father's voice in the back of my mind. You were too young to understand money. But the bank statements didn't lie. Neither did the transaction history. Airline tickets I'd never booked, shopping sprees I'd never taken, tuition payments to schools I'd never attended. My brother's alma mater stared back at me from the loan ledger like a silent accusation. I closed the laptop and stared at the wall, trying to remember if there had been any signs. Times when things didn't add up. The holidays when my parents were unusually generous. When Ethan seemed to bounce back from one failure to the next without ever hitting rock bottom. But I'd never questioned it. Because that's what families do, right? They cover for each other. They take care of each other. Except when they don't. I drove back to my parents' house that evening, not because I expected an apology, but because I needed answers I knew I wouldn't get any other way. The lights were on. The house looked the same as it always had. Warm, welcoming, like the betrayal I'd uncovered couldn't possibly live there. But it did. I knocked once, twice, then let myself in. My father was in the recliner, TV blaring. My mother in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove like the world hadn't cracked in half. You need to fix this, I said, my voice steady. My mother turned, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Fix what, honey? My credit, the debt, everything you've stolen from me. The smile slipped. We didn't steal anything. You signed my name on 4 credit cards, a student loan, an auto loan. I counted them off on my fingers, and then you let it rot. You let me carry it. My father muted the TV. Watch your tone. No, I snapped. You don't get to police my tone. Not after this. He stood, looming larger than I remembered. We did what we had to do. For Ethan? I demanded. For you? And I was what, just collateral damage? You wouldn't have understood, my mother said, soft but sharp. You were too young. I laughed, bitter and cold. Too young to consent, but old enough to carry your debt? The words hung heavy between us. I want you to make this right, I said, folding my arms. Pay it off, clear my name. My father shook his head. We don't have that kind of money. You had enough to ruin me. We had no choice, my mother added. You wouldn't even be in this situation if you hadn't tried to buy a house so soon. I felt my stomach twist. They weren't sorry. They weren't even pretending. You can't just erase me from my own life, I said. We didn't erase you, my father growled. We made sure you were taken care of. By stealing my future? His silence was the only answer I needed. I turned toward the door, my chest tight, my hands shaking, but I stopped before I left. You think this is over? I said, my voice low. But it's just starting. That night, I opened my laptop again. I pulled up a blank document, titled it The Ledger, and started writing down every account, every date, every charge. I wasn't going to let this sit. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't let them decide how my story ended. What would you do if the people who raised you thought they owned your future? For days, I couldn't bring myself to touch the ledger. It sat there on my desktop, tab open, blinking cursor waiting like it could hold my anger for me. But every time I looked at it, I felt trapped between rage and shame. The kind of shame that doesn't make sense because you know you're not the one who should feel it, but it clings anyway. I'd spent my whole life trying to do things the right way. Save, budget, stay in my lane. And now every late payment, every piece of wreckage they'd piled under my name was stuck to me like tar. I started Googling things I never thought I'd need to know: how to dispute fraudulent family debt, how to recover from identity theft, what happens if your parents steal your credit. The search results weren't comforting. I found forums filled with stories like mine, buried between posts about healing and hopelessness. People who'd been chewed up by the same machine, who were told by the people they loved that survival justified anything. There was one comment I kept coming back to. A woman had written, "It's not about the money, it's about taking back the ground they stole while you weren't looking." That stuck with me, because it wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about the fact that they'd built their safety on my silence. I called the credit agencies, disputed the charges. They told me what I already knew. It was complicated when the fraudster is family. Police reports, legal battles, proof of intent. It would take years to unwind. Years I didn't want to spend fighting paperwork while they kept living like nothing happened. I needed something more immediate, more human. So I started talking. I created a burner TikTok account. No photos of my face, no name, just words on the screen and my voice. Steady, low, measured. What happens when your parents use your name to borrow money and never tell you? What happens when they call it love? The first video barely got views, but the second? The third? They spread. Quietly at first, then louder. Comments flooded in. I thought I was the only one. My dad took out $40K in loans under my name. I've never told anyone. Thank you for saying it out loud. I wasn't alone. And neither were they. 2 weeks later, I posted about my credit denial. No names, no direct accusations, just facts and feelings. And then the email came. No subject line, just one sentence. "Stop airing our business or you'll regret it." It was from an account I didn't recognize, but I knew the tone, knew the phrasing. My mother might as well have signed it. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling the familiar twist of fear. But underneath it, something steadier. I replied, "I'm not airing our business, I'm cleaning up your mess." I didn't hear back, but I knew they were watching. I kept posting, kept learning. I found a small group of women who'd gone through similar battles. Some were further along, some just starting. They told me what they'd done, how they'd rebuilt their credit, fought back without burning everything down. I met Mrs. Jennings through one of those connections, a retired financial counselor who ran free workshops for survivors of financial abuse. We met at a coffee shop and she listened, really listened, as I told her everything. When I finished, she leaned forward, hands wrapped around her mug. "You can fight this the hard way or the quiet way, both work, but one lets you sleep at night." I raised an eyebrow. "What's the quiet way?" She smiled, soft but sharp. "Learn the system better than they ever did, then use it." For the next month, I did. I read, I studied. I learned the difference between charge-offs and collections, between secured credit and debt recovery timelines. I found ways to build my score back, piece by piece, without waiting for their apologies. And then I started sharing what I learned. The TikTok account grew faster than I expected. Thousands of followers, hundreds of messages, stories that made my own feel like just another tile in a bigger mosaic of quiet theft. One evening, I checked my inbox and found an invitation. TEDx local event, seeking voices for financial empowerment. Someone had seen my videos. They wanted me to speak. I almost deleted it. What did I have to offer beyond my own mess? But then I thought about that comment, the one that stuck. It's about taking back the ground they stole while you weren't looking. And I realized I had plenty to offer. I RSVP'd yes, and I started writing. Not a speech about debt, but about the people who use love as leverage, who believe that silence is a given. I wouldn't name my parents. I wouldn't need to. They knew who they were, and soon, so would everyone else. When they call it love, but it feels like control. What do you call it? The invitation sat in my inbox like a dare. I'd said yes, I'd committed to the TEDx talk, but now the reality of standing on a stage, sharing a story that wasn't just mine, weighed heavier than I expected. Telling strangers about debt and betrayal felt safer behind a screen. Out there on a stage, there would be no hiding. I kept thinking, what if they show up? What if my parents sit in the back, arms crossed, waiting to tear me down again? Or worse, what if they act like it never happened? Like they're the victims of some imagined slight? But the question that mattered more was, what if I don't tell it? What if I stay small, stay quiet, while they keep living like none of it matters? I started writing the speech. I didn't start with the money. I started with the feeling. The moment I realized love can be used as a weapon. The moment I understood that silence can be the heaviest burden you carry. A week later, my brother Ethan showed up. Not unannounced, not politely. He sent a single text. I'm outside. I should have ignored it. Should have let him sit on the curb until the message was clear. But something in me needed to see his face, needed to know how far he'd go to defend them. I opened the door. He stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes darting like he hadn't decided how angry to be yet. You've got them real stirred up, he said. I leaned against the doorframe. Good. You're making a scene. I raised an eyebrow. No, I'm telling the truth. If that feels like a scene, maybe that's on you. He scoffed, shifting his weight. You think putting our family on blast makes you brave? I folded my arms. I think speaking out about being stolen from makes me honest. He shook his head. Mom's sick over this. Dad's ready to cut you off for good. I laughed, bitter and sharp. Cut me off? Ethan, they used me as a credit card with a pulse. There's nothing left for them to cut. He flinched, just a little. You could have come to us, he said. Handled this like family. You mean like when you came to me before signing my name on loans I never agreed to? Silence. I let it hang there. You've always thought you were better than us, Ethan said finally, voice low. No, I said quietly. I just thought we were supposed to care about each other. I thought that meant something. He looked away, jaw tight. I don't need your forgiveness, he muttered. I wasn't offering it. He left without saying goodbye. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the old guilt rise again. But this time, I didn't let it win. The shame didn't belong to me. It never did. 2 days later, the call came. My mother's voice on the line, too sweet, too controlled. Honey, we need to talk, face to face, please. I knew what this was. A final attempt to pull me back into the fold, to remind me of the unspoken contract we'd all signed without knowing. The one where loyalty meant silence. I said yes, because I wanted to look them in the eye when I told them I wasn't coming back. The house looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was just bigger now. They sat in the living room, side by side on the couch like two pillars propping up the same crumbling roof. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, the silent enforcer. My mother spoke first. You've made quite the mess. I smiled thinly. No, I'm cleaning one up. She reached for my hand. I didn't give it. You're hurting the family. I met her gaze. No, you hurt the family. You broke the trust. I'm just shining a light on it. My father's jaw clenched. Do you really think airing this out helps anyone? It helps me, I said, and I think it helps more people than you want to admit. He stood, pacing. We're your parents. We did what we had to do. You did what was easy for you, what crushed me. Ethan stepped forward, voice harder now. This ends now, Avery. I stood too, facing all three of them. No, Ethan. This ends when I say it ends. I left before they could respond. I walked out the door, down the driveway, into a life where they didn't get to write the rules anymore. And for the first time, I felt it. The ground under my feet wasn't shaking. It was solid. If speaking the truth feels like betrayal, maybe it's the lie that was family all along. I didn't find out about the auction from my family. Of course not. That would have meant admitting they were losing ground. Instead, it came through a local notice, tucked between listings for foreclosures and estate sales. The Sinclair family home, the house I grew up in, the house that had stood for generations, was going up for public auction. Starting bid, $120,000. A bargain for anyone who didn't know the weight that house carried. I stared at the listing for a long time, my heart somewhere between clenched and calm. It should have hurt. Watching them lose the one thing they swore they'd always protect, the house they'd built their pride around. But I didn't feel sorry. Not anymore. Because I knew what they'd do if they managed to scrape together the money. They'd spin it into another chapter of how they survived, how they sacrificed, how they kept the family name intact, no matter who paid the price. Not this time. I reached out to Mrs. Jennings. "I have a plan," I told her. She leaned forward, curious. "Something legal?" "Legal," I said, "and permanent." Together, we set up a nonprofit fund. Nothing flashy. Just a quiet legal entity designed to support financial literacy and recovery for women trapped by family debt. The paperwork was smooth, the mission was clear. It didn't have my name on it. It didn't need to. I made sure the nonprofit had just enough funds to enter the auction, and just enough cover to make sure they never saw me coming. The day of the auction, I didn't attend. I sat in a coffee shop downtown, watching the minutes tick by, knowing that somewhere across town, my parents were probably pacing the floor of that courthouse, praying for a reprieve. When the call came, the Lorraine Financial Freedom Center now owned the Sinclair home. I let the weight settle. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't realized was missing. I didn't move into the house. I didn't need to. Instead, I watched from a distance as the renovations began. Walls painted, floors stripped. The front lawn where I used to play as a child transformed into a community garden space. Inside, the bedrooms where I used to sleep became offices and classrooms. We held workshops there, classes, quiet conversations between women who'd lived through their own versions of my story. It didn't erase what happened, but it rewrote the ending. The TEDx event came quicker than I expected. I stood backstage, palms damp, heart racing. The stage lights bled through the curtain, soft but demanding. I thought about my family, about whether they'd heard, about whether they'd care. But I wasn't here for them. I was here for the girl who sat in that bank, clutching a denial letter and wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I stepped onto the stage, and I told the story. Not about them, not directly, but about what happens when love turns into leverage, when silence becomes the price you pay to keep peace. I spoke about the house, but only as a symbol. Sometimes, the place where you were hurt becomes the place where you heal others. The audience was quiet when I finished. Then the applause came, steady and full. It wasn't for me. It was for the idea that we don't have to stay broken. Later that night, I received a message from a name I knew too well, Lorraine Sinclair. It was short, barely a sentence. "I hope you're proud." I stared at it for a long time, waiting for the old guilt to stir. It didn't. I deleted the message without replying. Because this wasn't about pride. It was about making sure the next girl didn't have to lose herself the way I did. And that was enough. What's more powerful, taking something back or turning it into something better? The grand opening of the Lorraine Financial Freedom Center wasn't meant to be grand at all. It was quiet, intentional, a ribbon cutting without the fanfare. No press releases, no dignitaries. Just the women who'd helped make it happen. The ones who'd been through their own private wars and decided not to stay silent. The house looked different now. Fresh paint, wide windows, the garden blooming out front, the same bones, but the spirit inside had shifted. It didn't feel like home in the way it used to. It felt like something better. It felt like hope with a backbone. I stood in the main room, looking up at the space where the fireplace once sat. Instead of a mantel, there was a frame. Simple, black, clean. Inside the frame, a copy of the first credit card application my mother ever signed in my name. Not to humiliate, not to shame, but to remind every woman who walked through those doors that the past leaves marks, but it doesn't have to leave chains. "This is where it began," I said quietly to one of the volunteers, "but not where it ends." I'd kept the event small on purpose. No family, no old friends who would gossip back to them. Just the women who understood what it meant to lose your name to someone else's need. But I knew they knew. I'd felt the ripple. The auction had reached them. The TEDx talk had circled back to the town. I didn't need confirmation until I looked outside. Standing across the street, just beyond the edge of the garden, was my mother. She wasn't dressed for confrontation. No sharp suit, no forced smile. Just a cardigan and jeans, her hands tucked into her sleeves like she didn't know what to do with them. I watched her watching me, and for a moment, I felt that familiar tug. The daughter in me who wanted to soften, to bridge the distance, to believe that maybe this time she'd offer something real. But then I saw it. The flicker of resentment behind her eyes. The way she stood just close enough to be seen, but not close enough to cross the threshold. She wanted me to see her. She wanted me to feel something. I turned back toward the room. The women gathered in quiet conversation, the sound of new beginnings humming under their voices. I didn't wave. I didn't nod. I let the moment pass like a cloud overhead. That night, after the last of the guests left, I sat at the kitchen table, the one that used to hold family dinners, now holding plans for next month's workshops. I lit a candle. Not for ceremony, just for warmth. And I wrote a letter. Not to my mother, not to my father, but to the girl I used to be. The one who thought love meant sacrificing yourself until there was nothing left. You didn't lose. You lived. And now you're free. I didn't hear from them again. I didn't expect to. Some stories don't end with apologies. Some endings are just a door you close quietly behind you. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is walk away from the fire you didn't start and build something better from the ashes. Sometimes, reclaiming your life doesn't come with grand gestures. It comes with quiet, steady choices that lead you back to yourself. I learned that you can't always change the people who hurt you, but you can build something stronger from what they tried to break. If this story spoke to something in your own life, I'd love to know. What part resonated most? Or where are you watching from? And if you found value here, consider subscribing for more stories that honor the quiet strength we all carry.